byline first, and that's when I got renamed Liz, because Elizabeth Nichols would not fit into the type that they were using in my call. And then he also gave me that title. And of course, he was from down South Mississippi, almost on the Louisiana line, Tylertown. That's where he was from. And he gave me that term because I had not known it.
Okay. Well, I'm going to ask the first two questions, just for the easiest questions you got. First of all, go ahead and give me your name.
Mary Lewis Poole.
Okay. I like to slate it that way because we're going to keep these for archive purposes.
Okay.
So 50 years from now when someone goes back, they'll know who you are. Second question, tell me what do you have there? What
I asked my brothers to share with me their memories of the campus and what it was like to be on the campus. And most of it are just instances and things that they did on campus. My younger brother had 4 very close friends the same age, all faculty children, and they were probably little hellions on campus, and I'll be glad to read you one example if you would like to hear it.
I think we'd like to hear all that you got there.
One of our favorite pastimes was tormenting Chief Burns Tatum and his deputy, Barney Fife, particularly Barney. During spring breaks, we would naturally be the only people on campus at night, and they always suspected us of being up to no good. That really wasn't the case, but the constant suspicion gave us cause to start giving them a reason. For instance, at Christmas break, we would muster up enough money to buy a bag of cherry bombs. We had and knew all of the neat hiding places on campus. We would start at the old gym, throw a couple of bombs in a metal drum used for trash, then hightail it to our hiding place. As Barney got to the gym, we would set off the next one in front of the cafeteria and hide there, then proceed to our next spot, maybe the girls' dorm, and this would go on till we ran out of bombs, and at that point we would retire to the grove behind the Y and sit peacefully on the benches as Barney rode by the grove, shining his spotlight on us, which we would just ignore.
And which brother is that? What is his
This
name?
is baby brother Layton, and his friends were John Hutchison, Alton Bryant, and Billy Silver. The 4
And they were all the same age.
all the same age. And there were memories of sitting outside the windowsill of the open window at Dr. Hume's office, then on the west side of the Lyceum, cracking and eating nuts with him. Can you imagine children going up to...
In those days, they wouldn't have thought anything of it.
I would get to open the shutter and help move the bleachers around the observatory. My father was an astronomer, and so we were often over in the observatory playing around, or he would go at nighttime with him and help open the dome so they could see things. All of the wonderful times at the Y, playing shuffleboard, ping pong, and watching one of the rare TVs available. Of course, there was the swimming pool, tennis court, the gym, the golf course, and the grill to enjoy. And then there was the thrill of trick-or-treating faculty houses plus all the sorority houses. We didn't mess with the fraternities. And tricking those that didn't bother to treat us. In short, I wouldn't give anything for the privilege of having grown up on that campus. As Father would say, those were the Helicon days.
Yeah, lovely. Quite true.
And that's about what baby brother had to say. Arthur is the oldest one, and one of his memories is going over to your house when you lived over where the chancellor's house now is. Ray Nichols, and faculty visited in those days, every Sunday afternoon.
They did. They took the children, too.
The children went too, all 4 of us.
Yeah, uh-huh.
And we liked to go over to your house, and the boys particularly, because your daddy had an old coupe with a rumble seat. And at least once, I think 2 or 3 altogether, he took us for a ride in that rumble seat. The fact of the matter is, as much as I enjoyed the short rides, that really wasn't a very comfortable way to ride. That is, by the way, when they lived behind what is now the chancellor's residence. He enjoyed trick-or-treating. He had the same thing to say. The Y was our playpen, and that's where we went to play. don't know this is of importance. Told about the time Father was at target practice, and none of my father ever had a gun, with Dr. Looper when he said, by the way, Mary's been diagnosed with diphtheria, and I've been playing with Mary Mack, his daughter, and he said, well, I was ashamed to tell you that my daughter's been diagnosed with scarlet fever, so
Oh, my.
neither one of us were very sick.
Well, I remember Arthur has mentioned to me the opportunity to ride in that old car.
Mm-hmm.
That car really didn't belong to my father. It belonged to Dave Pancratz.
Oh,
But
really?
if Dave were out of town, or for various reasons, he might leave it with my father, and it would stay there with us. And they did a lot of things together, both professionally and fishing. They were particularly fond of fishing,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes took a couple of us little girls. It's not that they were so liberated that they were going to teach us to fish. They sent us off to play in a stream and stay out of the way. But that's the car he's remembering.
Another memory that Arthur shared was probably in, he said 1941 or 42, Father picked me up at school before noon and took me to the observatory so I could watch the transit of the sun cross the equator. And when the sun came into view, there were huge black spots on the face of the sun there on the floor. I said they needed to cleanse that lens, assuming that it was the telescope that had a dirt on it. He explained that wasn't a dirty lens, but storms on the face of the sun. They were huge storms, and that night while we were eating supper, someone called to say that something strange was in the northwest sky. We stood out on the apron outside the garage and watched the aurora borealis resulting from a huge storm. And we don't have the aurora very often down here, but I remember them talking about it.
I don't ever remember having seen it in this part of the world.
And he mentions the lab equipment. If you go over to Mary Bowie, you'll see all of this expensive equipment, valuable equipment that Barnard bought back in whatever. Well, that used to be stored in the basement of the physics building, and Father would let us play with it. If you even look at it hard, over in the museum now, they go into orbit, but we used to crank that solar system and watch it go around.
You had all the advantages.
We had all of the advantages. Another important part, of course, was swimming. My brothers were swimmers, and they were lifeguards. And let's see, I think Arthur talks about taking a Red Cross. Oh, he remembers earning his scout badge with Dr. Rice in the med school. Now, I don't remember Dr. Rice.
I remember Dr.
In
Rice.
pharmacology.
You maybe wouldn't remember him because they never had any children, but he was on the medical faculty, and I don't know that they made the move to Jackson. I'm not sure. I just know they retired down to the Gulf Shores area, which is the first time I'd ever seen it, when we paid them a little visit when I was probably in my teens.
Well, he said, we finished the requirements for that in about 2 sessions, and I wondered about the rest of what he did, but he had me come back and talked a great deal about the ways in which certain pharmacologicals interacted with the body. I was so naive, it was several years before I realized he had just carefully inoculated me against using street drugs. Well, I don't think any of the rest of this is pertinent to what they're just things that we remembered about the Hulls and
Yeah.
visiting with them. And we had gone out. Dr. Hall had found a huge hornet's nest out in the country somewhere that was no longer had hornets in it, but he wanted that nest, and he invited us children to go with him and Father. And when we came back, Mother was standing on the porch, and she said, "Come listen, I think we're going to war. They've just bombed Pearl Harbor." We had just moved into the house. one of my brothers has died, but he said if Roger were here, he would tell about going to the Williams house for dinner. Now, the chancellor had all 6 of us for dinner.
Mm-hmm.
And the maid kept popping in, wanting to know what Mrs. Williams wanted. Well, it turned out there was a call button under the table, and Roger was sitting there patting his foot.
On the call button.
We don't have those anymore.
Well, they were really very generous about having faculty children, because I remember my brother and I being invited too. And I remembered what we'd had to eat, and Harder said, "Oh yes, I know that meal." So mother had standard menus
Menu that she cooked, yeah.
that she had regularly. But yeah, they were, and that was not unusual, because I don't know whether you participated in some of the dues where girls of my age were brought in to be, well, it was junior hostesses, is what it was amounting to, so you would learn what to
Etiquette.
do, etiquette, and so on, and float around and serve things, and have on your pretty dress, and and learn what to do, and not giggle and be silly, and just be helpful and try to stay out of the way, which was a hard combination for girls that age. But that's what we did, and I don't know if you participated in that or.
I think maybe I did once.
Yeah.
I think Mrs. Hall tried to get me involved in that.
Well, she might well have done. I don't know, but I think Ruth, Mrs. Williams, was probably more engaged in it on account of Harder and wanting her to have friends around, which she was never without. She has a wonderful.
Oh no, she always had friends.
Well, she was so outgoing that she promoted that, and I remember her telling me once that Mr. Faulkner had called her father and was worried about Jill being rather lonely. Well, of course, they lived in somewhat isolated situation, as we did too, down that hill off Fraternity Row. So our situations were somewhat similar, but I guess I know Mr. Faulkner was concerned, and the chancellor said, "Well, I don't know. We just always have a lot of kids around," and I think that was less true at Roanoke, and probably he didn't do anything to promote it, though he was certainly extremely cordial to the younger people, as he would have been to anybody. If there were nobody else there in the dinner party to visit with, he'd visit with all of us. Yeah. Well, what else have you got there from your brothers?
That's about what they had. Arthur remembers finally helping move the physics department from Barnard over to the new one. One of my good friends was L.D. Worthington, he thinks, was his last name. He was a technician in the physics department. I remember standing on the grass in front of the west wing of the old building, Barnard, with L.D. loading up big trays made like stretchers for patients that were used to carry the lab equipment from the old building to the new one. We'd load them up and 2 students would carry them over. I also knew the librarians, and I'd look up a book I wanted in the card catalog, take it to the desk, and if one of the regular librarians was there, as opposed to a student helper, she'd say, "Just go get it, you know where it is." And that was a big help years later when they moved the Williams Library. I had been sent to the old library, which is now Bryant Hall.
Bryant Hall, yes.
To load boxes to transfer, and Miss Seville saw me loading boxes and wanted to know what I was doing. And I told her I had a job helping with the move. And she said, "Not here. Get over to the new building. You know how to shelf books. These others don't." So instead of hot, dusty old library, I worked in the clean new library.
Miss Seville was rather austere maiden lady who spent her whole career as a librarian. And I remember her quite well because Mother worked with her for a while when Mother briefly worked there after Daddy died.
I don't think there's much else in here. In my memory of those days, walking across the campus and finding the steam tunnels, or the pipes where the steam would come out in the wintertime and the grass would be so green, and you knew where those exits were, and you go warm up before you took the next trot across campus.
Yeah.
That and Arthur did remember the mulberry bush that was between what is now Croft Institute and Old Venice, and Venice, not Old Venice, Ventress Hall.
Ventress Hall.
And we'd make a detour from the swimming pool by there and eat those mulberries. And of course that would stain the towels. And by the time we got home, we had stained blueberry towels, and my mother would fuss at us.
She didn't like that a bit, did she?
But we went swimming every day.
I think we all did, and we all learned to swim. And you say he mentioned the life-saving. I remember that Mary Ann Meir and I took that course and passed both the written exam and the swimming when we were only 10. And the unimaginative woman who was teaching it, who mainly was concerned that the football players got all their credits in line, would not give us any recognition for having passed everything because we weren't 12 years old yet, and we were indignant, to say the least.
Well, Arthur was in that same class. Let's see if I can find it.
He would remember this woman, I'm sure.
He had already done the life saving for Scouts, and they were going to show him a thing or two. Let's see. I should have marked what all these were. Okay, here it is. The swimming pool was a similar summer life. Billy Nicholson could not swim with us in the summer because his mother was afraid of polio. Remember that?
Indeed, I do.
He was not allowed out of the house, and we couldn't usually play. The summer I was 14, the war was going on, and the Red Cross came to teach a class in life-saving as a part of summer school at schedule. I signed up to take the course, and the instructor complained I was not old enough or big enough for the course, but the university said Red Cross requirement not to refuse anybody who met the university's requirements. And I don't know how in the world I met them, but I did. The first day of class, we were taught the tired swimmer carry, and I was the tired swimmer. And I was paired with a big lineman from the football team, taking the course for credit. He was to pretend he was the tired swimmer, and I was to bring him in. I saw the instructor say something to him that made me suspicious. Then, just as I tried to get him into position for the carry, I saw the instructor wave his hand, so I got a good deep breath. The football player climbed on top of me in the water, but I grabbed him and took him all the way to the drain under the 3-meter board, and he started struggling to get up, and I was able to safe carry on him, bring him up, and swim to the ladder. I never heard another peep out of that instructor. Of course, I'd had my Scout life-saving badge and had been taught how to deal with badly frightened, tired swimmers. So that must have been the same time you took the course.
It could be. I'm not sure. I just know the woman had no sympathy at all for 2 little girls, even though we were indignant because we had met every requirement. I have a strong memory of your brother Arthur that he may not remember at all. And we were riding our bikes in the grove behind the Y, and that looks like very smooth grass, but it's not. It's very ridgy in there. And I was not paying enough attention. I wouldn't have been riding with my hands off because I was more cautious than that. But still, I flipped off of that bike and chipped part of my front tooth.
Oh.
Did not hurt, but I knew my mother was going to have a fit. I was more concerned about that. And it frightened us both to death. And of course, we both just scooted for home. At that time, we were living in Faculty House 1. As I said, Mother was just, so upset. But of course, it was not permanent damage, though in those days they didn't do any major repair work on a child. They just you just lived with it until you got old enough that they would fix it, which I think they finally did for me when I was 16. Until then, I went around snaggletooth and self-conscious, as one could imagine.
Well, Roger nearly lost his ear riding a bicycle. He was on in the faculty houses, not the main road, but going down in front of where the Hutchersons lived.
Oh yeah, I know. I remember exactly.
And he was riding the bike. He was learning to ride the bike, and he said, "How do you stop it? How do you stop it?" And whoever was helping him said, "Well, just put your hind foot backwards." Where he couldn't figure out how to do that, so he wrecked and cut his ear absolutely down to the lobe, and so of course there's no feeling much in the ear. So he came home with that ear dangling. It wasn't bleeding, and he said, "Father, I think I hurt myself."
Oh my!
And he called Dr. Cully, and Dr. Cully said, "What has Roger done now? Bring him on down."
Bring him on down.
And he sewed it up, but put your hind foot backwards.
Yeah, it seems to me I've heard that story. And it's just it's something you can show somebody in a matter of a few seconds, but to explain it in a way that they can translate it into use right that minute
Doesn't work very well.
is a different thing. Well, have you, memories of your own beyond your brothers and your memories combined of things that you may have been involved in that they were not?
Well, I remember living in the faculty house. We were there just 2 years, I think. We had father had hung a swing out, and I would swing out there in that hollow. We were at number 7 next to Billy Silver.
Oh yeah, I know exactly where you were, because the Silvers lived in that house the whole time they were here.
I guess they were 6 and we were 7. There's a big ravine behind us, really.
Yeah.
And I'd get out there and swing and sing. You could hear me all over the place.
Well, that is what was wonderful about that little neighborhood. When I was participating in the panel on Jim Silver, I started out by saying this is going to be as much about the family as about him, because I knew them long before I ever had a course with him. I said my first memory is of Bill Silver, age 2, John Hutchinson, also age 2, going on about their business like everybody else as if it were perfectly normal for a couple of toddlers
To be out by
to
themselves.
be out by themselves. I was only 9, but I was old enough to notice, and it seemed to me unusual. But they weren't that far from home. I'm sure somebody had an ear cocked to listen for them.
Well, I imagine my brother Leighton was in the middle of them or close to it.
But and I guess I had forgotten that you all were in that faculty house, but it must have been pretty much in the same period that we lived in house number 1, which we were there, I think, less than 2 years.
Well, we built, of course, and we're in the house when the war broke out.
Yeah. And it was probably one of the last houses to be finished. I know Will Lewis describes the house where he grew up as the last house to be finished as the war started and all residential construction
Right.
stopped.
It had a train car load of reinforcing steel and a train car load of cement in there. That would not have been available. And they signed the papers on the house the day before Pearl Harbor.
Oh my.
So, yeah. But Father had worked in Washington the summer before, and his friends up there said, "We're getting ready to go to war." And Mother said, "Find me a place to have a farm so I can feed my family."
And she had a big garden.
And that's what she did. She grew everything we ate right on the border of the university campus.
And my father did the same over on the other side of the campus. I mean, he was much into his farming operation and lived next door to Mrs. Hathorn. He, in his family notes, will tell of, well, I took taking so-and-so, whatever the cow's name was, over to the Hathorns, clearly to be serviced. Mrs. Hathorn's hundreds of acres over there.
Right.
But she provided help as needed.
Well, I bet that's where Father was taking our cow on
Could
a
be.
Sunday. He had to walk up what is now Jackson Avenue. It was Highway 6
Yeah,
with the cow one Sunday morning. That just about did him in.
I bet.
He was so glad when artificial insemination came into being.
Well, that would have been the long way around to get that cow to Miss Hathorn, because the road along the backside of the Chance's property was not there then. Well, there probably was some sort of lane. I don't know.
I've not quite figured out where her place was. I drive back there now and I can't quite figure it out.
The oldest building back there around all of the planted areas was where her house was. It was exactly there. And the driveway went from the road where the Coliseum is. You turned into her driveway right where the new women's athletic facility is.
I knew it was over in there somewhere.
Yeah, that's where it was. And she, of course, was a remarkable woman that raised this huge number of kids, many of whom were quite young when her husband died, and they all graduated from the university. I have an article saved from many years ago when they were honored for the number of degrees that they had among them. So there were at least 17 or 18, fewer people, but that many degrees. So she did what they moved to Oxford to do, which was not uncommon. So many families moved to Oxford on account of the university.
Sure.
And it's a good part of the population if you went back and looked at who showed up in those days.
Another interesting faculty member was Mrs. O.A. Shaw.
Oh, yes.
The first time we had hogs to butcher, Mrs. Shaw said she would come show us how to take care of the lard. We took it down to City Grocery, and they cut it up, put it in their quick freezers. And City Grocery was City Grocery in those days.
That's right, it was. And
But anyway, we rendered the lard, and the next year when we did it, baby brother Leighton wanted to help cut up the fat to make the lard. We had a great big old iron kettle out over an open fire to render that lard.
You want to do it there and not in the house because it was a smelly.
But there's nothing like those cracklings. But anyway, Mother wouldn't let him work with those sharp knives, and he said, I want Dr. Shaw to come back. And Mother kind of did a double take. You know that lady, Dr. Shaw. Well, everybody of importance had doctor in front of their names as far as we kids were concerned.
We didn't know any better.
We didn't know any better. Everybody was doctor to us.
Yeah.
They were important.
Most of them were.
Yeah,
I used to laugh and say I think I was 10 or 11 years old before I found out that everybody didn't have a PhD. Seemed like the normal order of things.
Well, faculty I remember all did.
Yeah.
Do you remember B Street?
No, I don't think I do.
B Street ran where Alumni Drive is now, and down to the depot.
Okay.
And Alton Bryant lived in the last house for a while, but it was Bryant, Bondron, Bishop.
It was B Street because all
All
them
of them lived with, and where the old law school is.
Yeah.
Those were big old white houses, and
They
every
were.
faculty member there had a B. And you know the street that went into Faculty Row,
Right.
there was another one there, and that was Bishop, I think. No, that wasn't Bishop.
One of them was occupied by one of the people who was dean of the law school for a while, and it was the one closest to
There
the
was
law
a Bell,
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Bell, Bondrett, Bishop, and Bryant was in the last house, the one nearest to the depot.
Well, and I don't remember a street that ran through, but there was a path, there was a walkway.
Well, there was a street. Well, there was a driveway.
Was
I don't know that it went all the way down.
And as you went underneath the tracks, there was a tunnel you could go through.
Mm-hmm.
But it was always dark and smelly, and I don't think I ever went in there, went across the tracks. there was a lot less trains going by than tramps in the tunnel.
But that was the way to get to town.
Well, yeah, it was the
Yeah.
most direct
Most
way
direct way, yeah.
before the bridge was in place. But it was the hilly way also,
Mhm.
quite steep back in there. We used to play on those banks too as little kids,
Mm.
not rolling all the way down them because they were very steep. We just rolled down probably 4 or 5 feet at the most.
Well, I noticed they're washing. They're going to have to put some ground cover on those.
They are washing,
Those
and they
banks.
aren't nearly as steep as they used to be. It was, I was mentioning that to her. She says, I was scared to death of those banks. I don't think we didn't have enough sense to be scared of them. When we first lived on campus, we lived in this former fraternity house where the Hulls lived after us, and the apartments included the Harris boys, or Harrison, the
V.B. Harrison?
yeah,
Uh-huh.
and Jerry Pancratz, and we were the only children in that part of the campus at that time.
Now, where was that? On Fraternity Road?
No, on University Avenue there was
Not Eastgate.
well, maybe it was called Eastgate. It
Brick-
was apartments.
Brick apartments.
Yeah,
Yeah.
2-story apartments,
Uh-huh.
about a dozen of them.
Okay, yeah, okay.
But I don't think any of the other couples who lived there at that time had children, except for the Harrisons and the Nichols and the Pancratz,
Hmm.
with the one. And the, I don't know how long any of them lived there.
Well, when was your house over where the Chancellor's house is now torn down? That was a neat old house.
I hated that house was gone. I took somebody down there to see it, and it just about broke my heart that it had been taken down. It was a wonderful old house that we lived in and did some adjustments to, but it had been built as a lodge in the early 30s. And that 10 acres was bought from the senior people that owned the bigger piece of property.
So that was not university property
It
then.
never was university property. It was always private property, and the oldest son, who was a dentist, bought that and built this alpine appearing place.
Mm-hmm.
That was his place out of town. I mean, his office and his house was right at the corner of South Lamar and University Avenue,
Mm-hmm.
where he put in a restaurant that just went under.
Mm-hmm.
So this was his place out in the country, and he committed suicide out there. I know nothing of the background except then his widow wanted nothing to do with the property. And Mama and Daddy learned about it somehow or another and asked his widow if she would rent it to them, and she did. And once there was a young family there and all this activity, well, she and her mother, who was with her then, decided they believed they'd like to be out there too. So she added another whole apartment, really, so that the house could be used as one unit or 2 separate units. And they moved out there for a while. And other people were involved in renting it until Mother and Daddy were finally able to buy it, and did so. It had been redone rather extensively by Dr. Martin, who was also a dentist. You may not have any reason to remember him, but he redid it, and once the war years came along, he was afraid to be out there where it would need so much gas to get back. Yeah, that's pretty funny, isn't
It's
it?
almost walking distance.
That's right. But that was the history of that place. It was never university
So
property.
your parents owned it for a while
They bought it in 1941.
and chose to move back on campus?
No, they never did move back on campus.
Oh,
after
you
that.
were in Eastgate before that.
Well, we weren't in Eastgate. We were in an old house that was next to what we knew as the music hall.
Oh yeah, okay. Mhm.
Wonderful big old
Oh
house.
yeah, I remember that.
And the Halls lived there, so you may have remembered it from when they were there.
Gosh,
After
they lived a lot of different places.
they did. They sure
They lived
did.
out on No Taylor for a while.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Well, at any rate, that's where we were, and they loved that place. And Mother regretted selling it for the rest of her life, and I regretted that she did too. I just wish I still owned that property. though I don't know exactly what I'd be doing with it.
Well, did Carrier then buy it up when he built his house?
He didn't buy this 10 acres. He bought the rest of what had been the property. After Mrs. I'm losing my train on the family name here, but after the mama, whom I knew, and the oldest daughter, who never married, died within just a few months of each other. In the late 40s, about 1950, that's when Mr. Carrier bought the property of about 30 acres, because I judged that the whole piece of property together had probably been 50 to 60 acres at one point.
But the university does own all that now.
Yeah,
all of
they
it.
own all of that, because Carrier left it to them with the stipulation that it become the chancellor's residence. But he lived there too.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
For a number of years, and she even longer. She lived on, and so they were, and they were good neighbors. She especially was a good neighbor, and of course he gave so much to the university, but socially was not all that acceptable. As I
We
the
won't go into
Silver,
that.
yeah, the Silver, I said, you know, if you want to know more about this, you can see me privately later.
Doesn't need to be on
Well,
tape.
he just was so outspoken and his language so
Colorful.
colorful that Mr. C, who owned the biggest restaurant in town at the time, told him not to come back there. He didn't want his business at any price. Just ordered him out, period.
Goodness.
I don't suspect Mr. Carey was accustomed to being ordered
No, I don't
anyway.
imagine he was either.
But Mr. C said, "Don't you come back here." So I guess he didn't.
Well, have you talked about the houses on University Avenue?
We have not talked about them at any length, but why don't you tell what you remember about them? And you mentioned catching up with Judy Trott, which is a good idea, which I will do. And they lived in that somewhere in that expanse of houses, and she'll know more about it.
Did they live there, or did they live on Van Buren just before you get to the Ford parking lot?
Well, they may have. I guess I don't remember with any certainty, because we were enough age difference that I was not. Dick, her brother, I think, was my age or a year older.
He's Arthur's age, give or take. So
Yeah,
he about your age, but well, the Cernies lived in the first house,
I remember that.
and I really can't remember. Well, one of our high school teachers lived in the one right next to the high school, on the town side of the high school.
Oh gosh.
But those were 100-year leases. They were built, and when the 100 years were up, they went back to the university, regardless of who had them. I don't know how all that works.
Oh, I have no idea, and I know that for several years the Humes, after he was chancellor, lived in White House on the university side of the old university high school. Because I remember that, and remember again being taken calling there, and Dr. Humes searching out old annuals and things that he thought might amuse my brother and me.
Right. And then they turned one of them into the home management house
The one
for a while
on the
on the other side,
Mm-hmm.
where Gertrude Ford Center is now.
Yeah, and there was a string of houses in there, including one where the Catholic Church was built. I can't remember exactly. No, Camille Stone lived in one of those houses. I remember that. She's younger.
She's just a year or two younger than I am.
Yeah.
1 year younger, I think. I think she's Roger's age.
I don't remember. I've seen her here at functions once in a great while, but those houses, well, some families stayed in them for longer periods and others were there not so long. Pancratz has lived in one of those houses for a short period.
Gosh, they lived a lot of different places.
They did. They really did.
Did a lot of moving around.
And they, of course, eventually bought that house on 5th Street. And I think David, Teresa's husband, always regretted that they ever let go of that house.
Well, which house on 5th Street would that be?
Next to where the Guytons lived. It would have been the Lewises and Tyler. And then there are two more houses, and one of them the Guytons lived in. And
Dr. Murray lived in one of those for a while.
that's right. I've heard her talk about it, but she remembered that as a very happy time in their lives.
I used to babysit for them.
Oh, really? Well, Doris is still very much with us and in the middle of things, so not wanting to participate in a lot of things once she sold her house. Some other people who lived in the development there out near you said, well, don't you want to come out here and help us garden? She said, oh, I certainly don't. That's why I was glad to be rid of house and yard and so on. So I said we didn't have gardens, we had yards.
That's right.
So anyway, well, you went straight on through, I guess, as most of us did, from University High School into the university.
I did. I detoured one year, my junior year, and went to Millsaps. I had 3 brothers in school, so we didn't have a whole lot of choice where we went.
Yeah, you just went where you could.
And went where we could, but I went one year, and it helped me make up my career choice. And I decided to come back to Ole Miss and get an Ole Miss degree. So.
Well, did you teach? I'm not.
No, my degree's in church music, and we've been in full-time church.
That's what I
music
thought,
all my
because
career.
You play the organ and the piano just as well as anybody I've ever heard.
Well, thank you.
It's true. It's true.
But Ole Miss didn't have a good music school in those days, and that's what I wanted. And my liberal arts father said, if you'll get a liberal arts degree, you can do anything you want to, and I'll see you through graduate school wherever you want to go. So I did, and he did.
Well, that's good to know.
But the organist at the Methodist Church was better than anybody I had found for studying, so I didn't have credit for it. But I went to Union Seminary in New York City and got a degree in church music, master's.
Yeah, well.
And found Frank.
Well, now that was worth the trip, wasn't it?
So we've been in full-time church work well, we did teach for 11 years. We taught in a small Presbyterian, Cumberland Presbyterian school, Bethel College in McKinsey, Tennessee.
Oh, okay.
Very wonderful part of our lives, but the church called him back, so we ended up in Baton Rouge for 16 years.
Well, that's a long time to be in residence there. And when music grabs you, I think it just does so. I've heard my dear friend Andrew Fox talk about it, and his mother was my godmother. Our parents were all very close. But John Fox was absolutely adamantly opposed
to
Andrew going into music.
You'll never make any money.
It's just not the thing to do, but Andrew prevailed.
And
that's a wonderful story that I have on tape with him too, because they sent him off to Sewanee Military School thinking that he would be away from that influence, and he got there, and whoever was doing the music program was mainly a vocalist and had no idea about organizing a band, so as a student this all fell in Andrew's lap. And he was ready.
One of Father's favorite stories was walking across the campus with John Fox, and Father said, John, they just don't have characters on campus like they used to when we were students here. And he said, A.B., we are the characters.
That was exactly right. He wouldn't have wanted to admit it, but and John was one of those for sure. A standout, but it was and some of these people, I forget who, somebody else I was interviewing in another situation entirely, was saying, well, you know, I don't think this particular faculty member ever associated with students or went out and had a drink with them. Well, nobody went out and had a drink publicly.
No,
anyway.
not publicly. All behind closed doors and
that's
full
right.
curtains.
But in any case, I said, well, but you forget that several of them, such as Bob Farley and George Carboni and Jim Silver and how many others I don't know, played poker together every Saturday night, and you know something more was flowing than Coca-Cola. While they spent that evening playing poker.
I wonder if faculty have the camaraderie that our parents did.
I don't think so, because I think there are too many of them for starters, and they're too spread out, and there's not the togetherness of this very tight, small community.
We lived together. We ate together. I know Father had coffee every morning with a group. And another one of his favorite stories was baby brother Leighton thought a Lewis had to be a physics major.
Nothing else was allowed. That was
Physics or math. I mean, what else was there?
Mm-hmm.
And so he got up to his junior year, and it became rather evident that wasn't where his strengths were.
Mm-hmm.
And so my father was dean by that time, and he said, "Now, Leighton, you've got to do so and so and so and so. You're not going to graduate." Well, he put off something like, I don't know whether it was a foreign language or something that he should have taken his freshman or sophomore year till his senior year. And so Father was just moaning and going to his coffee group. He said, "I'm just afraid Leighton's not going to make it. He's just not going to graduate." Well, he did graduate. And Father was at the podium calling out the names.
I see.
And the chancellor was handing out the degrees.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when he called out Leighton's name, Leighton broke rank. And he said, "See, Father, I did make it." But what he didn't know was it was an open mic. So it went out to everybody.
That's wonderful. That's great. And I bet he treasures that story till yet.
Yep, and so Leighton became a bank president instead.
Well, I'd say that worked out pretty well for him, most likely.
My mother used to say, "I have two sons who are colonels in the Air Force and a son who is a bank president." And my father would say, "And a son-in-law who is a professor, and it is a noble profession." Because Frank went on and got a PhD too when he was teaching. At that point, he was teaching. But Mother bragged on her boys, and Father bragged on his son-in-law.
Well,
It's a noble profession.
It's a noble profession. Well, and it is indeed. And that's why I think there was another aspect of growing up in an environment that we considered special, and a place with great gifts to enjoy. We could look around with such impatience at that age and say, "Well, there's nothing to do here."
Well, Arthur's opening, he said, this was a PS to his thing. "I forgot the artist series. We saw the real Marie Von Trapp and the children.
Right, I remember
The Don
that.
Cossack chorus,
I
do you remember
that,
them?
Sure.
And dancers. I don't recall how many Met sopranos, a few tenors, and to my best memory, going to hear Donald Graham, whose brother Paul," and he said Garmisch, he wasn't sure of the spelling, Gramsch,
Very
was
German, very difficult to spell.
on the Ole Miss faculty and arranged for Don to sing required concerts at the old elementary school auditorium. He was finishing his degree at Eastman or Juilliard, and I had never before heard someone who could very literally rattle the windows of that old auditorium, and going to the Messiah in Fulton Chapel. And one Christmas it was so cold, I believe it was raining, because I seem to remember my coat was wet, and we were in the balcony where the temperature must have been 105 degrees. And I thought they would never get to the Hallelujah chorus. But we had those experiences. We had the artist series, we had football games, we had baseball games.
That's right.
That we could go to.
And you know, my father ran that artist series for many years, and that gave us a lot of interesting experiences, I will have to say, because you entertained these people at home. So where else were you going to give them a drink, or going to even find any place to take them that would be suitable or acceptable at 10 o'clock at night or whenever the concerts were?
Well, there weren't but two places to eat anyway.
No.
Or one, the mansion. The rest of them were just student places, really.
Well, Grundy's was...
But that wasn't a dining out place. That was.
Well, no, it really wasn't, but not by my definition. But we did have, when these groups would come, we had the advantage. And Donald Graham, oh Lord, he was so talented and so good looking. And I remember being with him somewhere, and this was years later, and saying, Donald, you are one of the best looking men. Or I said, you were one of the best looking men I'd ever seen. He said, I was and I still am. I said, you sure are?
Speaking of dining places, do you remember the tea house?
Oh, I remember it very well.
And whose tea house was it? We were trying to come up with a name and I couldn't get it.
It was Miss Ella Somerville.
Somerville, that's right.
And of course, the old Somerville home is right up here on 5th Street. It's where Vassar Bishop lived so long. Vassar remembered when all this property going toward town from 5th Street and where the tea house was, all used to be a cotton field when she was a child.
Gosh.
I've heard her talk about it. But this, the Tea Hound was a very popular place, and I don't think it ever had regular hours. You had to
Schedule things.
schedule things there, and it had a little stream running alongside of it. I remember that too, and so did Tricia Brown remember that little stream.
Huh, I don't remember the stream.
And the Tea Hound, of course, went out of business. I got the feeling from something Mrs. Holworth told me, who would have been part of that same family. She was Vassar's sister, that their relative who ran it just got tired of fooling with it. So I remember Mother taking me to a sale where she just was selling stuff, dishes, whatever was there. I was only about 9, but she had an old platter I wanted, and she was only asking $1 for it. And Mother bought it for me, and I use that platter till yet.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's just the right size for a big turkey. It's very appropriate, the colors and everything. I still have that platter. But a lot of people remember, especially people of a little earlier generation than we are, going to all sorts of special social events there.
And the other place to have social events was between Ward and Rick's Hall.
But what was the name of it?
I don't know that it had a name.
I don't think it did either. I've heard Tommy Etheridge tell in the film that he and Will Lewis made together, he called a place over there Heffley Hall, but he's mistaken because nothing was named for Miss Heffley.
It was Ward.
Huh?
It was Ward.
It was
Ward and
yeah.
Rick's.
And he was talking about where the girls ate, but it was never called Heffley Hall at that time. That came along years and years later.
I didn't realize the girls ate there, but I know
I
they
didn't
had
know that either. But
had
he
teas
said,
there.
yeah, I think that well, I didn't know it either, but that's what he said.
Well, did you know Bondi Webb, who cooked it?
Oh, yeah, very well. And my brother remembered him because he said he would always save me an extra dessert.
Bondi made my wedding cake.
Oh, did he?
He did.
Well, he was...
and his sister worked for us.
Oh, did
Bessie,
she? I see. And so many of these names were borrowed from faculty members because it was Dr. Bondurant, who was, I guess, head of liberal arts in his day. I'm not sure, but I think I'm right about that. He was retired by the time we came
Right,
along.
right.
But that's who Bondi was named for.
What name for?
And he wore that big, tall...
He wore that chef's hat.
He did that.
And cafeteria was the place to eat.
Well, it was one of the few places, and I think the only place that would be serving a Sunday dinner.
And that we could afford to eat.
Yeah, and we all flocked out there and thought it was just grand. And the food was good.
Bondi was a good cook.
I mean, the students maybe complained, but they really didn't have anything much to complain about. At least I didn't think so.
We didn't either. It was a treat. We didn't eat out very often because Mother grew everything we ate.
Well, plus there were so many of you. By the time you totaled up the bill for six
people.
You run through a good deal of the allowance for that week, I expect. Yeah. Well, Mary, tell me what else you would like to add, if anything about your friends or anything else that we just have not touched on. We've touched on a lot, I know.
Well, I can't think of anything. I was not as involved as Leighton was because I was busy doing my own thing. When I found the organ, every minute I had vacant, I rode my bicycle down to the church.
Well, that's a wonderful thing to be able to do, and I do think music is all absorbing. When it grabs you, you pretty much stay grabbed.
And I was very active in the band, and that took a lot of time.
Yeah, right. And I think a lot of people that were active in the band were so very committed to it and loved what they were doing.
Oh, Mr. Work was just a genius. He made a silk purse out of a sow's ear when he came here.
When you all first started out, the squeaks and the squawks people were trying to learn to play the instruments just dominated everything throughout.
Nobody knew anything about anything.
Starting from scratch.
But he built an outstanding program, and he taught us a love for music.
Yes.
And he continued the education I was getting through piano.
Right.
He wanted it correct. He did not.
He didn't tolerate.
He didn't tolerate sloppy playing.
Yeah, well, I can understand that.
So.
And Andrew also credits him with being so major in Andrew's decision.
Oh,
to
of
go,
course, yeah.
Where
I'm
he
sure
did. I really was thinking more myself when you started of the university band, because I knew a lot of people who were involved in the university band as well.
Well, I played in the university band at least 3 years in high school. If not 4, they were hard up for horn players.
Oh, I see. So they were glad to see you.
And believe it or not, my parents let me go on band trips. I got an eye-opening.
I guess you did. Slightly different environment than the Lewis household.
It was a different environment from the Lewis household. I think my first trip was to Auburn.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll never forget, that was pre-air conditioning.
Well,
and it must have been in the fall, and the windows were open, but War Eagle all night long.
Huh.
And what went on that band bus, I didn't know anything about that.
It's all new to you. All new to you. I know when I first was approaching Jim Autry to get more heavily involved in the Mississippian, because I needed him, and he was the most qualified and energetic. He was on a band scholarship. Mm-hmm. And was all caught up in those activities and saying, well, I don't have time to blah, 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 blah. I said, well, yes, you do. You're going to make time one way or another. But at one point, he was the, whatever you call it, the major domo, wearing the big hat.
Drum major.
The drum major, because he said kids would run along and throw rocks at his hat. So, anyway. Well, it has been a great, delightful time.
Well, I don't know that I have helped you in any way.
Oh, but you have, because you have just honed in as if you knew exactly where I was going with the memories of the campus and the environment and the children and the way we were.
Well, it was a close-knit group, and like Arthur said, we had the best of both worlds.
Yes.
We were exposed to things that other people weren't.
Well, everything that the institution could provide us.
And I'm not sure it was the best of all worlds, in that I've come back and I have seen a community that works together totally. And I don't think that was true in those days. As my brother said, there was the university community, and there was the town community, and there was the county community, and we kind of went our separate ways.
Very much so, and I don't think there was any attempt on anybody's part
to be separated. It just was.
It just was, and I don't think there was any attempt to bring it together, because I doubt anybody involved would have seen quite how to do it. And I didn't see any real reason to do it either.
I wonder who was responsible for finally getting the two to work together, because they certainly do now.
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the tax base, and suddenly you've got money to spend from the tourist tax and things that help build the baseball stadium and so on. So I think once you've got a base of that sort, with some financial substance to it, you have something that just was not there before. And as we have discussed earlier, housing was so scarce.
Oh, there just was not any rental property anywhere. Father chaired the committee to put faculty in faculty housing. He was in charge of those, and that was one headache
I'm sure it was.
to keep enough of them rotating out, so that he would have a place for incoming faculty to stay for a year until they could find a place.
Well, and people got in those places, I'm thinking particularly of the Silvers, it was very inexpensive rent, and they didn't
35
want to leave.
$35.
Yeah, I mean, they just were situated there, and they were permanent squatters, or whatever you want to call them. They weren't planning to go anyplace unless somebody forced them to, and at that time, I think now you can only stay for a limited time in whatever housing the university still provides.
I don't think they have but one now.
On the other side of Sorority Row?
On the west side. I think they took all but one house there. Oh, I don't know where the faculty stay in those apartments that are back there.
I don't know either, but there are.
That on the sorority row is now for the sorority girls.
Well, but you know that little apartment behind what we called Northgate?
That house that's still back there?
Well, there's one house back there, but then there's some brick apartments on around the corner, just before you get to Crosby.
After you pass the Kappa Kappa Gamma house.
You know the circle, come down in front of Northgate, and then turn up where that one house is. Aren't there some brick apartments before you get to the...
It might be. But I think all that, they redid all those apartments. I think it's all sorority.
I know Northgate.
Overflow of the sorority
Oh, is
girls
it?
live over there now. And there's a little bit what used to be called the Village, where the new law school is now. There are a few apartments over there.
There are few apartments over there, but that's grad students. That's
And
I don't think there is any.
that was built as Veterans Village right after the war. Though several people other than veterans lived there over the years. But then it was the only facility provided for married students.
students, right?
And there were increasing numbers then because you had all these men coming back from the Second World War that had families or started families, and it was.
Speaking of working together, one of the greatest things they did was to move those faculty houses to Village Green.
Yes.
Those were nice houses to begin with.
They were.
It was a nice little floor plan, and they have made a nice little community out there with those. Fred Lorenzo deserves
credit, yeah.
Double pat on the back for what he's
Right.
done to preserve the houses and to provide decent housing.
Yeah, and I ride up in there occasionally just to look at it and think how well situated it is.
Can you identify any of them?
Not with any certainty.
Fred tells me he's going to give me a plat sometime. I said, I want to know where 7 is because it has been so altered we can't find it. You know, they took porches off and added porches.
Well, it was a bit tight, I know, for a family with 4 children, but for our family with 2 children, to have 3 bedrooms and 2 baths. That was
We thought we'd died and gone to heaven with 4 children. Because we lived in that house next to Dr. Little on South Lamar.
Okay.
And it was 2 bedrooms and 1 bath. And a living room, dining room about as big as this, and that was it.
I don't think I was ever in that house, but Arthur and I were walking along somewhere at one of these reunions, and he was remembering a woman who'd been in our class, Frances something was her name. She lived in a house just off of South Lamar. Well, he remembered walking to school with her. I have no idea whether she's still living.
But to have 2 baths in that day was something, and a basement. And we had a coal furnace with a stoker. Father didn't have to go down in the morning and stoke the furnace to get the heat to come up.
And that's what those new faculty houses had.
Right,
and
they had electric stokers.
That was considered a great luxury.
Oh, it was.
From having to go to the basement and break up and shovel.
That's right, he shoveled coal every morning down on South Lamar. Mother thought she had come to Heatherlands when they moved from Washington, D.C.
Well, and she had,
And she had.
by comparison,
But,
well, he was with the Bureau of Standards when he was up there, and that they used to be just up the street from where we lived. They've since moved, but from where we lived on Porter, just above 34th, if you went on 34th and went up that next hill, there was the Bureau of Standards. I think at Van Ness, something like that. But well, this has been a delightful time, and we've covered a lot of ground that I've not covered really with anybody else. Each interview has been different, and that's what I was hoping for, and what I'm glad to have, because we have broad memories, shared memories, but different memories depending where we're coming from and what our affiliations have been over the years, and our father's affiliations, which had a lot to do with what we all had access to.
well, my father loved to teach, and he loved Ole Miss.
Mm-hmm.
And Leighton called him the day he retired, the second or third time, whichever it was, and said, "Congratulations." And Father said, "For what?" He said, "For retiring." He said, "It's the saddest day of my life. I was born to teach."
Yeah.
So he taught Sunday school till he was 98.
Well, he had to be teaching something.
He had to
didn't
be
he?
teaching something.
Well, I think some of us just have that instinct. I think my father did too. He would have been at a total loss not to have students to deal with. And he always did have. And I think so many of the faculty felt that way. That's another trait that I think is probably changed again with the size of the institution, the number of faculty, the number of students. It could not remain as it was.
And so many faculty are here doing research and not teaching.
Yeah. And that's an entirely new topic. We won't have long enough this
Go
afternoon
into that.
to go into that.
Oh, I hear these. I have 2 classes I have to teach this semester. Well,
Duh. That's what you come for, honey. If you're not teaching, but it's a different point of view and a different. Well, the university world is also quite different than what it had been then.
oh,
And
yeah.
faculty members came and stayed. They didn't move around
No.
hither and yon. Many of those people had been here, including your father, I suppose, their entire careers.
He came here in 36 and stayed.
Yeah, and I think of some of the older ones, such as Dr. Bishop, who would have been here longer than that,
Probably.
and made their mark and didn't move on, just leave us with the memories,
That's right.
which we're glad to have.
That's right.
I'm glad to have.
That's right.
Thank you for your time.
Well,
It's
you're
been
welcome.
wonderful.
You can edit it